You're wasting your time, Jaden. Some people just aren't cut out for this. Those were Professor Ellis's exact words. His office reeked of stale coffee and ego, the blinds drawn like he was hiding from the sun, or the truth. I stood there, clutching my final project in trembling hands, the one I'd poured my soul into for months. He didn't even look up from his desk. You should consider dropping out before you embarrass yourself further, he added, scribbling something onto a file that I now realize wasn't even mine. Outside his office, students were laughing, the hallway bathed in golden afternoon light. The contrast stung. Moments ago, I was hopeful. Now I was gutted. I nodded slowly, swallowing every word I wanted to scream. Not because he was right, because I already knew I wouldn't be here much longer. And not for the reasons he thought. My name is Jaden Walker. I was 22 at the time. First-generation college student, raised by my grandmother in a two-bedroom house just outside of Birmingham, Alabama. I didn't grow up with much, secondhand clothes, part-time jobs by 16, and more overdue utility bills than birthday candles. But what I had was grit. That and Grandma's constant refrain, "The world won't hand you anything, baby. You'll have to code your way out." And so I did. I chose computer science because it felt like building magic out of logic. I spent my nights at the campus library, fingers flying over the keyboard, coffee growing colder with each new line of code. Weekends? I worked the tech desk at a used electronics store, fixing people's cracked screens while silently dreaming of building something that would change lives. I still remember when I got accepted into that college on a full academic scholarship. Grandma cried so hard, she dropped her cornbread. "Don't let them break you, Jay," she told me the night before I left. "They'll try. But you're not made to fold. You're made to fly." And she was right. They did try. From the first semester, I felt it, the subtle coldness from students with trust funds and Tesla keys, the professors who never remembered my name, who praised flashy presentations over raw effort. But I kept pushing. I joined hackathons, wrote open-source tools, helped classmates debug their code even when I had exams the next day. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would see my worth. So when I walked into Professor Ellis's office with my prototype for a community resource app that could help underfunded neighborhoods connect to aid, I was proud, hopeful. And then, he told me to drop out. Like everything I'd done meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. What Professor Ellis didn't know, what no one at that school knew, was that I had already made a decision 2 weeks before that meeting. I wasn't just building that app for a grade. I had entered it into a national innovation challenge hosted by a tech incubator in San Francisco. And, out of 9,000 applicants, I was one of the 10 selected. It wasn't just a scholarship. It was a seed fund, a mentorship program, and direct access to angel investors. So while Ellis thought he was shutting the door on my future, I had already opened a better one. Quietly, on my own terms. That same evening, I packed my things, said goodbye to the campus library that had become my second home. As I walked out, I left behind the doubt, the whispers, the professors who never saw me. And I carried one thing forward, a signed investment agreement for $100,000 to build my app into a real, working company. 3 months later, the app launched. 6 months later, it went viral. And 1 year later, I was invited to review funding proposals for early-stage tech projects. One of those proposals came from a familiar name, Professor Ellis's latest startup. I almost didn't open the pitch deck. When I saw Ellis Tech Solutions in the subject line of that email, my stomach twisted. Not with fear, but with something deeper. Closure. He had applied for seed funding through one of the incubators my company now sponsored. His new revolutionary project was a cloud-based collaboration suite for educators. The irony almost made me laugh. A week later, I was scheduled to sit in on the panel interview. I wasn't the only decision-maker, but I was the only name on that list he wouldn't recognize. Jaden Walker, managing partner, Equinox Ventures. The pitch day came. It was held at a sleek co-working space in downtown San Francisco. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows. Catered lunch, polished floors, a long conference table where ideas and egos got laid bare. Professor Ellis walked in like he owned the air around him, flanked by two nervous-looking grad students. When I introduced myself, his eyes paused. I watched it happen. That flicker of recognition. Then disbelief. Then discomfort. "Jaden Walker?" he said, almost choking on the words. "In the flesh," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I believe the last time we spoke, you suggested I drop out." He forced a laugh. "Well, look at you now. Guess you proved us all wrong." "No," I said calmly. "I proved myself right." His presentation was decent, technically sound, but lacking the soul, the story. I sat through it politely, but the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. When the floor opened for questions, I leaned forward. "Your platform focuses on increasing accessibility for underserved students, correct?" I asked. "Yes," he nodded quickly. "So, how do you plan to serve those you once dismissed?" He blinked. I'm not sure I follow." I didn't push further. I didn't need to. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a former nonprofit CEO, narrowed her eyes. After the pitch, I stepped outside. The sun had started to dip, casting the skyline in a golden glow. Ellis followed me. "Jaden," he said, "I just want to say, I always believed you had potential." I turned to him slowly. "No," I said, voice steady. "You believed I didn't belong. And now, you want my backing to keep your dream alive." He scoffed, a trace of indignation surfacing. "This is business, not personal." I smiled. "But it was personal when you told me I wasn't cut out for this, right?" Before he could respond, Lauren, one of the other panelists and a former classmate of mine, stepped out. She looked at Ellis. "Funny. You told me to switch majors because women aren't logical thinkers. I guess you were wrong about more than just Jaden." Ellis's face drained of color. She turned to me and said, "I'm voting no. Not because of spite, because this man's vision doesn't align with our values." "Agreed," I replied. And just like that, his project died in that hallway. Not with shouting. Not with revenge. Just silence. And a door quietly closing behind him. After the pitch was over and Ellis had left, head low, steps uncertain, I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I stood by the windows of that glass-paneled conference room, watching the streets below, as if trying to locate a younger version of myself. The kid who used to bike 3 miles to his part-time job after class. The kid who skipped meals to afford a new charger for his laptop. That kid would have begged for Ellis's approval. But me? I didn't need it anymore. Later that evening, I met with the other board members. We had a follow-up discussion about the applicants, and unsurprisingly, Ellis Tech was unanimously declined. Not just because of personal reasons, but because his project lacked depth. It had no empathy, just ambition. When the vote ended, I didn't gloat. I redirected the conversation. "There's a young developer named Rosa Martinez in our pipeline," I said. "Her app connects undocumented students to scholarships. She doesn't have the polish Ellis does, but she's the real thing. She just needs someone to believe in her." The room leaned in. Real interest. By the end of the week, Rosa had her funding. And a mentor, me. Meanwhile, Ellis tried to follow up. He emailed, called, even sent a letter. All with the same tone. Justification, not accountability. He still didn't get it. So I sent him a short message. Professor Ellis. I wish you the best in your future endeavors. This panel values vision, but more than that, it values integrity. Jaden Walker, 2 months later, I got an invitation to speak at a university, my former university, no less. Not from Ellis, of course. He'd taken a sabbatical. But the dean had heard about my company's growth and wanted me to address the new generation of tech students. I almost declined. But then I thought about Grandma, about her voice saying, "Don't let them break you, baby." I walked into that auditorium wearing a navy suit and a calm smile. Students clapped. A few even stood when I took the mic. And I told them the truth. Not just about success, but about failure. Doubt. Being told you're not enough. "I was once told to drop out," I said. Not because I wasn't smart, but because I made someone uncomfortable. My background, my confidence, my ideas. But I didn't listen. I built my own table, then decided who got a seat at it. I looked out over the crowd and saw young eyes, hungry with potential. I saw Rosa in the third row, smiling with her whole soul. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about Ellis anymore. This was about creating the world I wish I had when I was 22. A world where potential wasn't buried under bias. That night, I returned to my apartment and found a package at the door. No return address. Inside was a small envelope, a thank you card, and a photo of my old dorm room, with the words written in pen. You showed us all what's possible. I don't know who sent it. Maybe one of the students. Maybe someone who'd watched from the shadows as I climbed. But I framed that card and placed it right above my desk, beside Grandma's photo. 6 months later, I stood in front of a building that once didn't exist, not even in blueprints. Now, it stood 3 stories tall, made of brick and glass, humming with life. The Walker Innovation Lab, a co-working space and mentorship hub I had personally funded in partnership with local schools and nonprofits. Inside, 25 young developers were writing code, eating pizza, laughing, making mistakes, and building futures. Futures no one could take from them. The air smelled like ambition, coffee, whiteboard markers, and hope. I walked the halls slowly, nodding at students who barely glanced up. They were deep in debugging mode. One of them had taped a quote above her screen. "Build like you belong here." I smiled. That was something I used to whisper to myself at 2 a.m. while trying to make sense of why some doors stayed locked, until I learned how to build my own keys. In the back office, Rosa Martinez was holding her own workshop. She now had 3 interns, a working beta of her app, and a pending partnership with 2 scholarship foundations. She glanced up as I walked by and gave me a thumbs up, her eyes glowing with quiet pride. Later that afternoon, we hosted a small open house. Alumni, local community leaders, even former professors attended. Among them, to my surprise, was Professor Ellis. He stood off to the side, clearly uncomfortable but trying to blend in. Gone was the swagger, replaced by something softer. When our eyes met, he gave a respectful nod. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. I nodded back. That was enough. I didn't need him to shrink for me to rise. In the corner, I noticed Lauren, the panelist who had spoken up on pitch day. She was now on my advisory board. Her toddler was tugging on her blazer, pointing at the interactive coding wall we'd installed for young visitors. "This place feels different," she said, walking over. "Like safer." "It's built on truth," I said. "And second chances." As the evening closed, I stepped outside. The sky had turned lavender blue, the city lights flickering on like stars of our own making. I sat on the front steps of the lab, watching as young developers filtered out, chatting about algorithms and user interfaces like they were the most natural things in the world. And then, as if summoned by memory, I heard her voice in my head again. "You're made to fly, Jay." I pulled out the card I kept tucked in my wallet, the anonymous one that came months ago, and read it once more. "You showed us all what's possible." My eyes welled up, but not with sadness. With stillness. With peace. I had started with borrowed time, hand-me-down dreams, and the weight of people's disbelief pressing on my shoulders. Now I stood taller, not to tower over anyone but to make room for those still learning how to stand. And I realized this wasn't the end of a revenge story. It was the beginning of a legacy.